Hello, everyone. Welcome to Modern Political Thought, PS 310 of the winter semester at Marymount Manhattan College. My name is Udita Chakravarti. I'll be your instructor for this semester. This, as you know, is an online asynchronous course. It is a 1-month course, very intense, and this is not the format I would have chosen to teach this course because we are going to be dealing with some dense philosophical texts, which would be better discussed in a seminar context. This format does not allow us to have much face time. But regardless, having recorded lectures has its own benefits. It allows me to be more systematic in my lectures, and it allows you to actually revisit them as and when you like. So we're going to see how this medium works. I hope at the very least that you're able to get something out of this course. Personally, my ambition is to, at the very least, generate in you some interest in the thinkers we read and the topics we discuss. More than that, I would want you to actually learn and understand the text we read, to understand the arguments that are made by these important thinkers, and also to think critically about the text that you read, to raise questions, to examine the weaknesses in the argument and the rest. But most ambitiously, I would hope that if you're able to internalize what you read and the things you learn, the concepts that you learn, and the ideas, that they're going to change the way in which you apprehend the world, the way in which you perceive and understand reality, the way you read the newspaper, the way you watch a movie, or have conversations with friends. Everything will be shaped by the things you learn in this course. So what is at stake is your very worldview. So in that sense, this course, of course, is very important. In this short introduction, what I'll try to do is say a few things about the title of this course. The title of this course is Modern Political Thought. It's an intimidating title. It has three kind of intimidating words: modern, political, and thought. They are not by any means easy to define. So I'll try to attempt, in a very preliminary and partial way, describe what these terms mean and how they fit together. So there are kind of three set of questions that I'll try to answer. First, what is political? Second, what is political thought? And finally, what is modern political thought? Right? So let's begin with the first. What is political? Again, here it is very difficult to give a one-line answer, a one-line definition, because the realm of politics is itself something that we will only be able to fully discover and unpack as we go through the course. But as a first attempt, let me say that the field of the political deals fundamentally with questions of power. How is political power? How is power in societies organized? How it is distributed? Questions about who rules whom and how do they rule? What is the relationship between the rulers and the ruled? It also pertains to questions about the social foundations of political power. What are the social groups who get to actually politically dominate others? And what is the relationship between social relationships and political power and political institutions? It could also involve questions about regimes. What kind of political regimes exist? What is a democracy? What is a monarchy? What is a republic? What is an authoritarian regime? How are these regimes founded? What are their internal weaknesses and dynamics? And also, more crucially, it raises questions about what is justice. What does it mean when we aspire for a just kind of political organization? What is the better and best ways in which political life can be organized in societies? So, as you can see, political involves a whole range of issues, and it is by no means easy to limit what kind of questions will be raised in this course with the thinkers that we read. So as a first thought, however, you should try to understand that political is fundamentally concerned with the ways in which powers is institutionalized in society. Political thought, however, is a certain kind of reflective awareness in the ways in which we think about politics. The term thought is a little bit imprecise and vague. It is, in a sense, too broad. Oftentimes, it refers to things like public opinion. So what is the contemporary political thought in the United States? How are people thinking, people in the streets thinking about politics? It can also refer to national culture, what is American political thought or what is French political thought. I use it deliberately because it encompasses, it's a very broad term, and encompasses two different modes of thinking about the political. One is philosophical, and the other one is theoretical. This difference between philosophy and theory rests on a very important distinction between values and facts. Fact, as you know, is a claim about empirical truth, right? What is factually correct and true, versus value is about what people think is worth doing, right? It is also understood, this fact-value distinction is also understood as the is-ought distinction, how things are versus how things ought to be. Now, philosophy, political philosophy particularly, is concerned with how things ought to be. Political philosophy tries to posit what good is, what the good is, and it tries to pursue that good through political means. That is, how do we shape our political institutions? How do we shape our regimes such that they allow us, the people who live within that regime, to achieve the good, right? That's the kind of philosophical, political philosophical inquiry is aimed at that. The theoretical, political theoretical insight, however, tries to distance itself from this claim of value. A political theory claims that we cannot really know what the good is, and hence we ought to be neutral in our understanding of politics. So political theory aspires to give you some kind of objective view of politics. So how politics really is. Theory, the term itself, comes from the Greek word theoria, which means to see. Right? To see, it means, it implies that there is somebody who sees and something that is seen. So politics becomes an object of study for the scholar or the intellectual. And the intellectual tries to unpack the mysteries of politics, to try to see how it really works, what are its dynamics, what is its nature. And oftentimes, theory involves revealing things that are taken for granted. You ought to be surprised by the things that you think are just obvious or second nature, right? So we are using the term thought in this broad sense that encompasses both philosophical modes of thinking, but also theoretical modes of thinking. The thinkers that we're going to read are trying to give accounts of political life as they really are, but oftentimes their conceptions and descriptions of reality underlie a set of assumptions about how things ought to be, right? So we're going to unpack the thinkers we read from both theoretical and philosophical frames. We're going to try to examine what their account and definitions of reality are, and also try to understand what they think the object of politics is and how they think politics should be pursued. So what kind of political society they're trying to imagine and why. Now, let me just make a slight digression about theory. As I said, doing political theory in general means that you ought to have a commitment to examine the things that you see around you. That is, to really scrutinize why things are the way they are. This project often leads to you being startled at things that you take for granted, right? That you ought to be surprised by how things really are, that there's nothing really obvious, that things are in fact quite mysterious. There are many accounts of the owl of Minerva. Minerva is one of the Roman goddesses of wisdom, sorry. and her animal is the owl. And there are many speculations as to why the owl is the symbol of this goddess of wisdom. And Ortega y Gasset, who was a Spanish intellectual, wrote in his famous book, The Revolt of the Masses, he made a claim about how intellectual persons are different from ordinary persons. What does it mean to be intellectual? And he says, I'm quoting from this text, quote, "To be surprised, to wonder, is to begin to understand. This is the sport, the luxury, the special to the intellectual man. The gesture characteristic of his tribe consists in looking at the world with eyes wide open in wonder. Everything in the world is strange and marvelous to well-opened eyes. This faculty of wonder is the one which leads the intellectual man through his life in perpetual ecstasy of the visionary. His special attribute is the wonder of the eyes. Hence, it was that the ancients gave Minerva her owl, the bird with ever-dazzled eyes." So to do theoretical work, to read theory, is to also try to look at the world with well-opened eyes, to look at the world like the owl of Minerva, who's always dazzled at what they see. Right? So political thought, to return to our main line of inquiry, is to adopt a theoretical attitude, that is, again, to look at the world with well-opened eyes, but also a philosophical attitude, that is to raise foundational questions about what are the values and normative judgments that underline our understandings about political reality, and what kind of objects and goals are pursued in us thinking about politics. Right? We'll obviously unpack these more concretely as and when we start to read the thinkers we're going to read in this course. Now let me come to the third notion, that is modern political thought. We are doing modern political thought as opposed to classical political thought. This is an important distinction. Classical political thought in the Western tradition often refers to the political philosophies that emerged in Greek antiquity. For example, with Plato and Aristotle, these are the two major figures. And they're considered to be part of the classical political philosophical tradition because, in two senses of the term, classical in that they are really high achievements, they are really laying the standards for what it means to even philosophize about politics, but also because they are the foundations. They lay the broad groundwork through which all later subsequent political theory, political thought emerges, right? As someone once put it, that all philosophy is a footnote to Plato, right? So everything follows from what these classical thinkers had already done, right? What is the distinctive character about classical political philosophy, however, is that for the Greeks, the primary concern and question about all intellectual life was the pursuit of the good life. The question is, what does it mean to be good and to live a good life? Right? This is a concern that comes out of philosophy in general, moral and ethical philosophy, and political matters are always subsumed under this more broad concern. So political philosophy is already always subservient to moral philosophy. And the claim is that human life has an intrinsic objective and purpose, that is to live the good life. The Greek notions for this are eudaimonia and arete. Eudaimonia is a kind of happiness, a fulfillment, and arete is a pursuit of virtue and excellence. And the question is, how do we organize our societies and our political institutions that allow for the citizens to achieve and actualize this good life? How can they live lives of fulfillment and virtue? Right? So all of classical political philosophy is driven with this concern. Modern political thought, however, marks a rupture in this tradition. Now, why does this happen? Firstly, modern refers to a distinctive historical period, that is the period of modernity. This is a period that's often referred to as the long 19th century, beginning with the French and American revolutions, the end of the 18th century, and up to the First World War and the French Revolution, and the Russian Revolution, sorry, in the first decades of the 20th century. So this long 19th century, especially in Europe, but also globally, it has global ramifications, is a period where the world as we know it transforms radically, right? There is a massive social transformation. Most what we call industrialization today, the new ways in which we produce things, we consume things, there is a rise of the market. Most of our social and economic lives get mediated through buying and selling in the market. There is a greater division of labor, which means more and more people do different kinds of things. Just think about the world that you live in. There are millions of people doing millions of different tasks, and all of them are somehow coordinated. And this coordination happens through economic interests and economic institutions. There's also political transformations. There is the rise of a modern state. We all, I would assume in this class, have citizenship in a nation state. There are around 180 nation states. All of them have specific character. They almost all have constitutions, for example. They all have standing armies, military force, and the rest. So these are all modern institutions. So the period of modernity sees a rapid transformation of our social and political institutions and life. But it also sees the emergence of new modes of thinking. You were assigned to read Kant's What is Enlightenment? And as Kant puts it, this period, the birth of the Enlightenment, is also the birth of, let's call it the freedom of thought, right? The removal, as Kant puts it, of man from self-imposed immaturity. That there is an opening of horizon, a space where humans can finally think for themselves and not rely on the orthodoxies of church or religion and the rest, right? So this is also the birth of a more scientific attitude to the world, that we can really understand the world through the means of our own reason and rational faculties. So in this context, in this difficult context of upheaval, change, transformation, and new possibilities, the whole ambition of political philosophy and political thought gets transformed. And that's what we're going to try to trace and look at. But why does this transformation happen? Because as we develop a more scientific attitude to the world, as we become more and more skeptical about the fact, the coincidence of facts and value, as we insist more on the distinction between facts and values, that is, we ought to be able to tell how things are separate from how things ought to be, the greater there is the need to re-examine political philosophy and its foundations, right? Because in the context of modernity, it becomes impossible to make the claim that we know what the good is, right? Who gets to decide what the good is, what is worth pursuing? And modern political philosophy, therefore, tries to showcase that the good in politics, the end or objective of politics, is something that can be determined on its own terms. That politics need not be in the service of moral philosophy. That politics can be emancipated from moral philosophy, and it can set its own agenda. And how can we know what this agenda is? By actually looking at what people do in political life, how actually political institutions get shaped, and what kinds of things people are doing, and what they reveal about their interests and ambitions. So politics becomes a kind of domain that can stand on its own two legs and does not need the support or anchoring in moral philosophy. This is the major transformation between the classical and the modern period, right? So what we have with modern political philosophy, and one of the thinkers that we're going to begin our course with, Machiavelli, as he puts it, the notion is political virtue, right? So there is no universal ethical and moral virtue, but there is a specific kind of political virtue, which means to be good at doing things that are political. This could involve a whole range of things. That is the pursuit of freedom from domination, from foreign domination. It could involve having a stable regime. It could involve pursuit of glory. If you're a ruler of a kingdom, a pursuit of glory and prosperity, and the rest. So the question becomes, how do people actually act politically, and what are the interests? What are the interests that they are pursuing? And how might, and then we can try to make claims about how can political institutions and societies be organized so that those objectives and those interests are met. Another thinker that we're going to read after Machiavelli, Thomas Hobbes, for example, claims that the real object of doing any kind of politics is security and safety, right? So the whole task of thinking about what it means to organize a political regime, a stable political regime, is from the pursuit of this value of safety, that everybody who lives in a particular state is safe and secure. Right? So this is the transformation that is occurring in the context of modernity. Politics can no longer be in the service of some abstract notion of the good. We have to look at why people are doing the things they're doing in political life and what that tells us about the nature and dynamics of politics itself. So who are we going to read and why? We're reading only 5 major thinkers. Of course, this is a very, very limited list. We could include many, many other thinkers. So this course is really truncated. It says more about the people we've excluded than the people we've included. But I think that it would be more worthwhile to actually take a few set of thinkers and read them systematically and seriously. Because these thinkers, Machiavelli, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, and Marx, not only lay the foundations for the way in which political thought emerges in this context of modernity, context that decisively shapes our contemporary lives, because they give you a whole catalog of concepts through which we can understand politics, but they also lay the major political traditions of modernity, political traditions that are very much still alive with us today: liberalism, conservatism, republicanism, and radical democracy. So these major traditions are also some things that come out of these major thinkers. There again, I don't make any claim of being exhaustive. As I said, we could include many, many more thinkers, but this is a good set of people who have been crucial in precisely shaping all subsequent political thought. I don't want to go on too long for this first session. I will make another video which contains instructions about more logistical issues about the course, what you're expected to do, what kind of assignments you have, and the rest. But let me end this module with a word on reading theory or reading philosophy. Now, this is difficult. For example, the thinkers you're going to read are writing in a very different time and context. They're writing in a very different style of prose that might seem alien to you. And they might be writing about things that you might think are not at all relevant. I will insist that if you stick to it and if you push through it, that it's actually quite rewarding to read all these thinkers. Not only because the issues they deal with are still relevant and are important, but also because, as I said at the very beginning, internalizing their thought will actually shape the way in which you view the world. In other words, you will be able to acquire new perspectives. And that is the crucial task of reading theory. I was very lucky to study social theory with a professor of mine, Jeff Weintraub. And at once, he gave me an advice which has always stuck with me, which is about how to read theory. And he said that when you're reading a serious thinker, and all of the ones that we're going to read in this course are serious thinkers, when you read a serious thinker, your objective as a reader is to relinquish your own assumptions and ideas of the world, and try to inhabit the mode of thought of the thinker you're reading, which means that you try to, if you're reading Machiavelli, you try to understand Machiavelli and internalize his framework and mode of thinking. It's, for example, going to swim in an ocean, right? If you're going to swim in the ocean of Machiavelli, then you're going to have to tread the ocean. You're going to have to move around according to the currents of that ocean. You cannot refer to other bodies of water, right? You're going to have to dive deep, go to the trenches, try to recover the pearls it has to offer, really inhabit the mind of the thinker. And then if you can make it back to the surface, then you have earned the right to ask the question, well, is any of this convincing? But it requires you really to relinquish yourself, to surrender yourselves to the text and to the thinker. So that is the challenge ahead of you. I will leave you with a small passage of inspiration. I often read this passage. It's from a letter that Machiavelli wrote to his friend Francesco Vettori. It is often referred to as one of the most famous letters in the Italian language. Machiavelli wrote this when he was in retirement and he was writing his famous works, the Discourses and the Prince, both of which we're going to read in this course. And Machiavelli is describing to Vettori his life in retirement. And I just want to read out this passage where he talks about how he enters in his daily life schedule, how he does his intellectual work. And he says, when evening comes, I return to my home and I go into my study. And on the threshold, I take off my everyday clothes, which are covered with mud and mire. And I put on regal and curial robes, and dressed in a more appropriate manner, I enter into the ancient courts of ancient men, and am welcomed by them kindly. And there I taste the food that is alone mine, and for which I was born. There I am not ashamed to speak to them, to ask them the reasons for their actions, and they, in their humanity, answer me. And for 4 hours I feel no boredom, I dismiss every affliction. I no longer fear poverty, nor do I tremble the thought of death. I become completely part of them. So the pleasure and struggle of reading philosophy and reading theory is yours alone, and you must own it. So see you tomorrow with Machiavelli.